Our coffee series with Vermont Coverts and Vermont Woodlands Association. This week we're hosting Forest Parks and Rec Procurement. I actually don't even know your title, so I'm not even going to pretend to tell them. Paul, Frederick, and Emma Hanson, and they're going to talk about wood utilization and what we're doing here in the state, where we rank, and what they do, and lots of things that I don't know a lot about. So I'm really excited about today. They're also going to answer my favorite question: what is your favorite tree and why? Once they get done a little bit of introduction, and then we'll take your questions. Kathleen's going to monitor the chat box and fill in any questions that you all may not have thought to ask. And we'll get started right away. So Paul, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and your favorite tree, and then you can pass it on to Emma.
Okay. Well, I guess to start with, Emma and I are the Wood Utilization and Wood Energy Program with the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. Both of us. The big two-man program here, two-person program, excuse me. I work primarily on the wood utilization side, and my job is really, I think, in the larger picture, my job is probably to support, I guess in general, we're supporting the forest products industry in the state. And that ranges from everything from doing workshops to working on markets to even to being the designated call center for Forest Economy Stabilization Grant, the Stabilization Grant Program recently. So, but basically everything that involves supporting the forest products industry and supporting markets for forest products from Vermont's private lands. Go ahead, Emma.
Hi, I'm Emma Hanson. I'm the Wood Energy Coordinator, which previously Paul was doing all the wood energy coordination in addition to all the other things. I think maybe that's the signature of our department, is that we both wear a lot of hats in addition to all the other things that we technically do. So my job is really to promote wood heat as an alternative to fossil fuels. And that's really like the short and sweet version. But then, there's all the good reasons for doing that I'm sure everyone on this call is familiar with, in terms of keeping forests as forests and growing our local economy and keeping more money here in Vermont. So my job is a lot of public outreach, public speaking, really a lot of consumer education, and that can take any number of forms, and can come along with a few other things along the way as well.
So Paul, let's get back to you. You didn't answer.
I didn't answer the I didn't answer the $64,000 question.
Really? And so you are a forester, is that correct?
I'm a forester. I'm a licensed forester.
Okay.
Yep. I have a degree from UVM.
Okay.
Yeah. The my favorite tree, I guess, Kathleen gave us a heads up that this was going to be on the agenda. So after some thought, I think my favorite tree is probably red oak, and it's just the fact that it grows so fast, self prunes very well. You end up with trees with very good form and high value. So I guess that's always been one of my favorite trees. So.
And Emma?
Not a forester, by any definition. My bachelor's are in French and anthropology, so here we are. It's a long and winding road. But my favorite tree, if forced to choose, would actually be white birch. I just think they're so pretty.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear those answers from foresters around the state.
And non.
And none. Sure. Yeah, not everybody is a forester. I'm not a forester. You don't need to be to care about the forest. So, and Emma, let me ask you, in terms of Vermont overall, our use of wood in heating, how does the state rank? I mean, in utilizing wood heat?
Yeah, it's funny, Kathleen, as you're like prepping me for that question, I can already feel how rusty I am since COVID because I haven't been spewing out my stats as regularly as I did before we all were regulated to our homes. But Vermont ranks very highly. We actually rank only #2 to Maine in terms of number of homes that use wood as their primary heat source.
And the state's use of wood in public buildings?
Oh, that's a good question. We do use it in quite a few, but to my knowledge, there isn't a state-to-state comparison of wood heat in public facilities. I would guess that we'd be at or near the top, though.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm personally interested, and I hope people are going to put questions in the chat, but I'm personally interested in what has changed in wood heating and technology to make it so much more practical and desirable today.
It's cleaner. It's the number one. Based on particulate matter emissions at the actual source, right? So at where you're actually burning it, we're able to do a much cleaner job now than we were 30 years ago. So that's when we're talking about wood heat, I mean, humans have been using wood for heating since forever, give or take like a decade. But we've only just gotten really good at it in the past 30-ish years or so. So when I'm talking about wood heating, that's what I'm talking about is advanced wood heating. So we're talking about really advanced technology that can burn wood really cleanly with a really clean combustion. So you aren't having these huge pollution sources at the point where you're actually burning wood. So you're able to do it really cleanly and conveniently. And so for us, that just makes sense, right? Because we don't have fossil fuel production here in Vermont. What we have is a lot of trees that are doing a pretty darn good job of managing. And so it makes sense for us to use our local renewable fuel that we have here in our backyard rather than importing fossil fuels.
Oh, someone wants to know if you can use your mic to ask questions. Was that you, Lisa?
No, that's Logan. So, sure, Logan.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Ah, great. Good morning. So my wife and I moved to Vermont right toward the end of January. Heck of a time to move to the Great White North, but it's been great. So we live on 18 acres in Springfield, in kind of a higher elevation. And so one thing that I was wondering was, I'd love to be able to harvest some firewood off of our wood lot, but I want to do so responsibly, as a private landowner, make sure that, I've got kind of the larger, ecology of our forest in mind and being a responsible land steward. So what are some of the things that I can keep in mind, or someone similar to me can keep in mind when kind of finding that right balance of, harvesting enough firewood and kind of the right type of firewood while also managing, our woodlot responsibly for wildlife and carbon sequestration and things of that nature.
Paul, you want to take that?
Yeah, I guess.
Logan, have you met your county?
I'm sorry, they broke up there a second. What was that?
Did you have something, Emma?
Oh, I was just going to suggest that he get in touch with his county forester to start thinking about a forest management plan, but I will pass that to you, Paul.
No, I think that's absolutely what I was gonna say, Logan. I would get in touch with the county forester, and they, while their time is limited that they can spend with any particular landowner, certainly a field visit with you, perhaps your wife on your property to kind of look and get a sense of what you've got to work with and what your goals and and objectives are for the property, and they can certainly make some general recommendations at that point. But I think that would probably be the best course of action, rather than to try to make some generic comments that may not be appropriate for your property.
And you
Gotcha.
can
Okay.
find contacts for the county foresters on the Forest Parks and Rec website.
Okay, great.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was to maybe put your mind at ease a little bit. I will say that with 18 acres, if you're just trying to heat one house, that's not going to be a problem. Like, you're going to be able to do that very sustainably without even making the tiniest dent. I mean, I've just to throw out a really generic statement. I read somewhere that a family with, you know, an efficient heating system could, within a 5-acre woodlot, could carry on sustainably regenerating the heating needs for one home. So with 18, you don't really need to be concerned. I mean, obviously you still want to do a good job and make sure you're picking the right ones, and that's where a professional comes in. But with 18 acres, you'll be fine.
Okay, yeah, I've been in contact with Hannah Dallas. She's our county
Yep.
forester, and so she kind of said, you know, look for trees that maybe aren't growing so well, that you know, maybe have some vigor issues. But I just wasn't sure if maybe there's anything in addition to that, maybe how, you know, you manage your woodlots, see if there's any other kind of tools or strategies I could implement.
I only have an acre at my house, and it is mostly wood. So I am burning the trees we cut down for my solar panels, and the one that fell in my husband's truck last year. And other than that, we bought our wood.
Gotcha.
So some other things you might want to consider, Logan, is if you're taking the trees down yourself, is taking the game of logging class from Northeast Woodland Training. That will help give you confidence and safety in using the chainsaw. And many people who've used a chainsaw for years say taking that class changes the way they operate in the woods. So I would recommend looking into a game of logging class. I would also consider what your goals are for your property. So yes, to pull off wood maybe for heat, but is wildlife also a part of that? You may want to talk to someone from Fish and Wildlife. They have their programs for reaching out to landowners. I think in your areas, it would be Travis Hart or Jackie Como from Fish and Wildlife, who could also talk to you about which trees, you know, might be better for wildlife that you might want to enhance, and therefore taking other trees around them for firewood might be the best case. Again, that would be in your forest management plan if you chose to do a forest management plan.
Gotcha. Okay, great.
I'm going to post in the chat too a link to a publication that came out last year from UMass and UVM called Forest Carbon. And I think that you'll find it really interesting. It's written for the landowner. So it's written for the layperson. It's not like a difficult to read forester science type piece. And it's really interesting about how you can manage for forest carbon, as well as for any other number of traits you would like to get out of your management plan.
Thanks, Emma.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So Tim wants to know, how much cleaner is the new technology compared to the wood stoves we used in the past or may still use today?
Very.
I
think
Emma, we need you to elaborate in this conversation we're having. One-word answers don't do us any justice.
I mean, it depends on what we're comparing to one thing to another. Oh man, if I can pull it up quickly, I'll actually find you a slide that demonstrates it really quickly. But I mean, like 80% cleaner, like really quite dramatic in terms of direct bringing down the particulate matter emissions from your chimney and your stove.
And where can we find the latest standards or requirements for new wood stoves?
The EPA website.
EPA.
Yeah, so the new rules are that you have to have under 2.0 is the particulate matter limit. And so you can't really even buy a stove after this year that exceeds that, unless you're buying it from a questionable source. But you should always buy a stove from a reputable stove dealer because you really want their knowledge and expertise. It will go a long way in the long run. And you should always have it professionally installed and your chimney swept every year in order to get the most out of that stove. But yeah, the new limits are really quite impressive. And we'll pull up that slide real quick, actually, if you guys start talking about something else, to buy me like 90 seconds of time.
Okay, not a problem. John Boughton says that he is in the planning stage for a game of logging 1 and 2 in White River Junction. So in October, so that's something we should be on the lookout for. Thank you, John. John's the retired Windsor County Forester. And there is a link here on forest carbon. So Paul, questions I get today, I get a lot of questions about markets for wood.
Yeah.
You know, in our COVID environment, things seem to have changed a little, although markets go up and down based on lots of things.
Mm-hmm.
So could you just talk a little bit about where we are today? Markets for logs, markets for lumber, availability of resources, that kind of big picture.
Sure. Yeah, it's on the largest scale, I guess, low grade wood versus higher grade wood. And when I talk about low grade, I'm basically talking about anything that won't make a saw log. If you talk to somebody in the sawmill industry about low grade, they're talking about low grade boards. But in this case, basically low grade trees, low grade logs that won't make a saw log or a veneer log. Those markets are really severely challenged at the moment. If you look at the harvest, the low grade harvest, about half of it actually goes into firewood for residential purposes in Vermont. We have a very high percentage of wood burners, as Emma has mentioned. So about 400,000 cords a year actually goes into residential firewood. After, the remaining low grade is split pretty evenly between pulpwood and poultry chips that are used in some of those institutional size systems that Kathleen mentioned, and certainly in the power stations in Reigate and Burlington that are the power plants that are producing electricity from wood. So those two are split about evenly. Pulpwood markets have been very tenuous since the pandemic. There's, over the course of the years, we've lost a number of pulp mills that are within a reasonable trucking distance of Vermont. So there's been some strain on the market for pulpwood right along, and that's primarily due to the shift in their culture and transition to more electronic communications. Any of you probably recognize that the local weekly paper that you used to get suddenly is only available online now. There's a lot less printing paper being used. Catalog, the magazines and newspapers have gone online. A lot of the communications that we do, when I started in the department 35 years ago, was all done by paper memo, is now all done by email. So there's been a reduction in the demand for pulpwood, and it's been exacerbated by the pandemic, with schools, businesses shutting down, and folks going to even more electronic communications. So we've seen curtailments at mills across the region. There was a big accident at the Pixel paper mill in Jay, Maine back in April that kind of compounded the issue. They had a digester blow up and have basically lost the pulping capacity at that mill. So that meant a lot of the pulpwood that was already in the production, sort of in the pipeline, as well as what they had in their yard, had to go to other mills, and it's meant that basically things have plugged up, and there's very little market right now for softwood pulp. Hardwood pulp, maybe not as bad, but certainly those pulpwood markets have been very strained in the last couple months, and it doesn't look like that's going to change anytime very soon. The sawlog markets vary depending on the species a little bit. Hardwood markets have been strained. Hardwood mills have been under pressure as a result of a couple of things that had nothing to do with the pandemic and predate that. Mostly dealing with markets overseas. A large percentage of our hardwood lumber, and some percentage of hardwood logs has actually been exported for some time. The furniture industry in the United States kind of hit its peak around the late 90s. And then as relations opened up with China, we started seeing more and more export of wood going to China and materials coming back from China. That actually grew into a situation where there was a lot more domestic demand in China as their economy improved, and less wood, less product coming back to the States. But that increased industry in Asia also took advantage of other raw material markets than the hardwood lumber that was being produced in the States, and it's resulted in a considerable drop in demand for hardwood. So exports are a very important part of the overall supply picture, the overall demand for hardwood lumber. And some of the trade war issues that have been going on in the last couple years and the tariff issues have had a real significant impact on the hardwood industry. That was, like paper, was compounded by the pandemic. In most cases, sawmills and logging were considered essential services, and those industries stayed open. But in a lot of cases, the secondary manufacturing industries were shut down. And as a result, there was sort of a backlog of supply that was, and a reduced demand for hardwood lumber. And we certainly saw that a lot with the flooring markets. At the same time as the secondary markets, the manufacturers were shut down, construction was shut down. So we ended up with, severely reduced demand and wood backing up in the pipeline again. Softwood markets have been a little different situation. Throughout the pandemic, markets for white pine and local markets for local retail markets for lumber have been strong, and people have been speculating, at least, that a lot of that's as a result of the fact that folks have been stuck at home. They've been working on projects. So I know there's a cedar mill in northern Vermont that's had very strong demand from a company that they do business with, producing cedar playground equipment that's used, basically background playground equipment. There was a strong demand for folks that were interested in, gardening and were building raised garden beds. Tool handles associated with gardening were very much in demand. So we've seen strong demand in that softwood industry. The other thing more recently we've seen in the realm of framing lumber, spruce fir, hemlock framing lumber, is a strong demand and a price spike in that lumber market due to a combination of reduced supply, and to some extent some of the large mills throughout the country curtailed their production during the pandemic, So there was less supply on the market, and since about June, we've seen an incredible increase in numbers of housing starts. You know, the construction industry was shut down for a period of time, and we certainly saw those housing starts tail off as a result. But once the construction industry opened up, there's been an incredible increase. And there's a lot of folks that apparently there's a lot of demand for housing as well. Folks are, you know, if you look at the market demand for existing homes is strong too, and to some extent that's folks that are trying to move out of the cities and move to more rural areas of the state. My next door neighbor just closed on a deal on his house with a couple from Florida that haven't been here, have not seen the house. They had somebody videotape it, made a full price offer to them. So it's, you know, we're seeing that outward migration from areas, I think, that have also seen a strong, high impact from the pandemic. There, I've talked enough for one day.
Thank you, Paul. So I have some questions for you, but I want to give Emma a chance to talk about what she's pulled up. And also, Tim would like to know if you'd provide the link to the website you mentioned on stove efficiency.
Yeah.
Just put it in the
It says
chat
that
box.
host disabled participant screen sharing. Can you possibly
Oh,
enable
I
me?
can, yeah, yep. I will make you a co-host and then you should share screen.
There we go. I got it.
Mhm.
Okay. So there you go. So it's nice to have that visual, right? You can see this, yeah?
Mhm.
Yeah, so you can see where, there we go. Let me just move your faces over. You can see where, so over here on the far right, we have an old non-certified wood stove or an outdoor wood boiler. So if you just drop down to a certified wood stove, and this number is in terms of PM emission, so that's pounds of particulate matter per million BTU. You drop down, that's about a 70% reduction in PM just by going from a non-EPA certified stove to an EPA certified stove. And stoves started being certified around 1980. It's kind of the cutoff. So if you have like a 1976 Vermont Castings Vigilant, which is what was in my house when I bought it, it's not certified and it's not great. You're going to notice a significant improvement by switching to a certified stove. And then if you go to a pellet stove, you're going to have an even lower PM rating. And then over here on the left, you can see where pellet boilers are pretty close to parity for PM emissions. So you've got really pretty impressive here in terms of what the PM emission at the burning source is. And I say that with maybe the like tiny asterisks that I like to point out that, you know, woods is pretty simple, right? Like cordwood is, you cut it down, you dry it in the front yard, and then you burn it in your stove in your living room. Pellets and fossil fuels have in common the fact that they've been processed somewhere else before they actually get burned at your house, which is why they're so much cleaner, is because they've been processed elsewhere. And that's especially true for fossil fuels that are processed far elsewhere. And so they burn so cleanly because all the dirty part has happened somewhere else. So with wood, we're taking a little bit more ownership. And so it's kind of a more complete picture, really, when you look at the PM profile of wood as opposed to fossil fuels.
That's interesting, you know, and the fact that that fossil fuel, that dirt is taken out elsewhere, also, by the time it gets to us, its carbon footprint is enormous.
Right, and this is something that's coming up more and more when we talk about environmental justice conversations currently. You know, so often, you know, people don't want to install wood systems because they perceive it to be dirtier than fossil fuels. But the reality is that we only benefit from clean burning fossil fuels because we've exported the dirty part somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. And then shipped it around the world.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Interesting. So a couple of questions, Paul, for you. Yep. So Tim wants to know if the state tracks how harvested wood is used on an annual basis, like in construction or for firewood, pallets, etc.
We do to some extent, kind of on the larger scale. We do collect data on an annual basis on sawlog harvest and low-grade wood harvest. So we have pretty good data on what the sawlog harvest is in the state, what the pulpwood harvest is, and what the whole tree harvest is, the wood chips that are going to the power plants. We do a residential fuel wood survey periodically. It's been, Emma, of like every 5 years recently.
Ish, yeah.
But I mean, years ago, we used to do them every other year. And it's just a matter of the availability of resources to be able to do that. So our fuel wood harvest information is probably a couple years old at this point. It's not uncommon for that to be, once every 4 or 5 years at best. At this point, we do not track what the amount of volume of wood that goes into particular products. We can collect that information at the sawmill level, at the pulp mill level, fairly efficiently. But once you get into the manufacturing end of things, there's a huge number of businesses that are doing that, and would make it very difficult to try to get that information. We can collect it sometimes on an industry-wide basis. So we might have data from the National Hardwood Lumber Association, for example, that indicates that about half of all the wood sawn in the country goes into pallets, or 20% of all the wood, 1 in every 5 boards ends up in China. But those are more national statistics and don't really reflect specifically what's going on in Vermont.
So, and is there a report that contains some information that people can access?
Sure. We publish an annual harvest report every year. Those previous reports are on our website. The easiest way to find them is to Google Vermont Forest Products Harvest Report, and it'll probably take you right to the site. There's
I'll just post it here, Paul.
it's kind of a scary path to try to get there from, navigating through the website from the first page, but.
Emma's going to help you.
Okay, great,
I'll
thanks.
put the link there.
I just navigated there. It is possible.
Okay. And go ahead.
So I was going to say the other thing we collect on a quarterly basis is from volunteer foresters primarily, is stumping information that we summarize and publish on the website as well.
Thank you. So Trevor is curious about whether hurricanes in the south have any effect on Vermont markets.
They will, from the standpoint of those folks that are participating in sort of the more national global marketplace. So mills that are selling wholesale probably will see some impact. What that impact is going to be a big question mark, and it's probably pretty complicated. I was looking at a news story this morning that indicated that you'd probably see some curtailment in production from some of the mills in the south. They were showing Laura's path or projected path, and saying there's 50 major softwood mills in the hurricane's path. So that may interrupt production for several days or a week. You know, it depends on what ends up happening, if there's flooding or wind damage. Wind damage could put more wood on the market. That's typically the case. Folks will try to salvage that material. How good it will be for product is going to be a big question. Depending on, you know, tornadoes often create blowdown, but they also twist the stem and shatter the wood fiber. So in many cases, you know, stuff that's been torn up by tornadoes tends to be a lower grade, you know, going into lower grade products. Straight line winds, you know, if they're tipping trees over, probably aren't going to have a huge impact on the wood quality. Some of the stuff I saw on the news last night looked like, you know, trees snapped off. And that could, you know, could end up being saw logs or wood that would have made saw logs had they been cut, now being pulpwood or poultry chips or going into a pellet mill in the South somewhere.
Thank you. So, Paul, I've spent the last several decades trying to navigate between the forest and the finished product that we make in Vermont, the wood manufacturers. You know, it seems like it should be an easy step. We have farm to plate, you know, you can go buy from a farmer, but we have a really complicated supply chain. And it makes that step from the forest to the finished product kind of difficult to navigate. You know, there are a lot of things that happen between point A and end point where the consumer actually buys a product. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, and a little bit too. Now, I know in Vermont we grow some prime northern hardwoods, and yet we're always concerned about low grade markets. So from a forester perspective, why is that so important that we have low grade markets?
Well, if you look, Kathleen, at the total harvest, so looking at all the product types, only about 25% of that harvest on an annual basis goes into saw logs or veneer logs. All the rest ends up in the other low grade products. So the pulpwood, the firewood primarily, pulpwood and poultry chips. If you don't have markets for that low grade material, it makes it very difficult to do a good job of managing your forest when you have a timber sale. You know, you certainly are going to want to, you know, there's a need to remove some of the upper grade material. That's where the vast majority of the value is. You know, I said three quarters of the total harvest is low grade. About, you know, that quarter that's high grade material is about 90% of the value. So, you know, there's not much value in that low grade material, but without markets for it and without being able to get some return on the removal of that wood, it makes it very difficult for a logger, a landowner, foresters to do good management and actually remove those low grade trees that are competing with the trees that a landowner wants to favor in their management, whether that be, you know, favoring them for economic value or wildlife or aesthetics. You know, in order to be able to afford to weed the garden, so to speak, you need to be able to at least move that low grade material. You certainly can have a logger cut it and leave it on the ground. That's not socially acceptable to most landowners. You know, there's certainly value in having that carbon on the ground, but it's not what most people want to look at. And if you've got to pay a logger to remove wood, it's going to make it very difficult for a landowner to get really excited about doing management on their land. I went on about that. Now I forgot about what the first part of your question was.
It was about the supply chain.
Oh, supply chain.
Kathleen, that was quite the question. You're like,
Okay.
Paul, lay it all on us.
Yeah,
So,
well.
let's throw it out there.
It's what they want to know.
The supply chain is interesting and is complicated. It is, I guess it's a little different than farming in one sense, because it's so much harder to move wood than it is to move vegetables, for example. So it's pretty easy for me to go out and pick sweet corn and lug it up to the house. If to go out and cut firewood on my wood lot, or to cut softwood saw logs, in my case, you know, you need to have the right equipment in order to do that. So it, you know, just the bulkiness, the logistics of moving that material around is part of the issue. But like you say, you know, we have mills that are producing high quality materials that should be easy for a secondary manufacturer or a craftsperson to utilize, but it isn't always the right thing. You know, it's not always, you know, the mills don't always have the ability to dry lumber to a moisture content that's going to be suitable for furniture. They may or may not be able to obtain the species that the manufacturers are looking for. You know, right now it seems, and I'm a little out of date as far as what's probably as far as what's in demand on the consumer end, but recently it seems like walnut has been a species that's been in high demand, and a lot of woodworkers are utilizing walnut or cherry in their production. While we do produce cherry, it's lousy cherry. Certainly, you know, it has a lot of defect in it that isn't desirable from the standpoint of somebody who's buying a fine piece of furniture. That material is much better coming out of Pennsylvania, and certainly walnut. You know, while I've seen walnut growing in northern Vermont, it's really kind of pathetic. It's alive, but you can't say much more than that for it. And you know, the central part of the country, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, grow fabulous walnut, and so, you know, the manufacturers, as much as we'd like to say, well, why don't you just use local wood? There's no point in using local wood if you can't sell the product that you're producing in the end. So that's been a challenge. When maple is in vogue, we're in great shape. You know, we produce some of the finest, whitest maple in the world. You know, very high quality material and very desirable, but is what the consumer is looking for.
Right, and that's what really needs to change, is consumer demand for certain species.
Yeah,
To make it.
and we've seen that over the years. I can remember when I was just starting college in the late 70s. My grandfather has about 500, or you know, my grandfather's property was about 500 acres in western Rutland County, and I can remember them coming in, doing a harvest, and basically just high graded the oak out of the woodlot. But it was, at the time, oak prices were phenomenal. Oak dropped, you know, the consumer demand, consumer acceptance of that species kind of fell off, and maple for a long time was in demand. Now it's darker, you know, and you didn't hear anything about people wanting walnut. Cherry has always been kind of steady, but so it comes and goes, and you know, consumer preferences change, but over the life of a business, you can't necessarily wait for that. So,
Right, right. And so you mentioned a word that John has in the chat box here, high grading versus load grading and that impact on the forest. And that's where low grade markets come in, I guess.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, if all you can sell and all you can actually afford to move out of the woods is the saw logs, it leads to a situation where either landowners are going to not sell wood, and sit on it, hope markets come back, or on the other extreme is what we call high grading, where basically you take the best and leave the rest. So instead of weeding the garden, you're pulling all the carrots and letting the crabgrass take over.
Mhm. So we're better off with leave the best and take the rest.
Well, I think it's got to be balanced to some extent, but yeah, I think that's what most foresters are looking to do, is try to take the weeds out, take enough of the high grade material to make it a viable sale, to get some return for the landowner. But our goal is to get to a higher percentage of that acceptable growing stock, that high grade material, and less of the low grade material or unacceptable growing stock in the forest. So
Kathleen, I'll put a slightly rosier perspective on the local supply chain piece. So just the only issue with the comparison to food is that we buy food all the time, like
Mhm.
all the time.
Yeah.
And you buy a new kitchen table, what, twice in your life? You maybe buy a wooden spoon once a year. But you buy wood heat, if you heat with wood, 2, 3, 4 times a year. And the wood heat that we buy, the wood we use for either cordwood or pellets, is by and large very local.
That is true. And thank
Yep.
you, Emma. And I think about that a lot because of all the work I do on the value added side of the industry, that there is a lot of consumer misperception about how wood impacts our life every single day. And we do. I mean, we do eat food all the time. There's no question about our need to support farmers, but we don't think about the wood that's in our life every day. And so, increasing that public understanding and awareness would go a long ways to help that narrative for people to understand how important wood is in their lives.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Am I the only one with questions here? I love to pick Paul's brain. I'm always interested in markets, and I like to learn about what's going on out there. And Emma has all that wood heat information in her brain. Let's take advantage of this opportunity, folks, and don't just give me the floor here.
I have a question. I don't know how to do it on chat.
Okay, go ahead, Ann.
Well, how does the digital book industry affect the wood and the sale of wood?
So digital and electronic communication certainly have had a negative impact on the pulpwood markets. In our case, a lot of the paper mills in the Northeast are really focused on utilizing the species that are available here. Years ago, there was a lot of newsprint being made out of softwood pulpwood. At this point, a lot of those mills in Maine, which are basically, Maine and New York State, which are the closest for us, are making high quality papers for things like magazines, glossy advertisements, and printing and writing papers. So, coated papers from the standpoint of the glossy materials, and uncoated papers would be the writing and printing and office papers that you see. So, overall, we're in a kind of a global marketplace for paper, probably more so than anything else. So, you're purchasing a digital book isn't going to have a huge impact in it unto itself, but overall, the digital communications have certainly reduced the demand for paper overall. So.
Thank you. The thing I was thinking of, all the college books are now mainly digital, and that has
Mhm.
I would think, some kind of an effect.
Yep, that's certainly when you get in, and we've seen it with the pandemic. There's been an enormous drop in demand for papers, printing and writing papers, and part of that's due to certainly offices being closed, people working from home, but the schools and the universities and colleges as well, not having that demand for paper has made a big impact on the industry.
Mhm. And so, Paul, what about specialty papers? I mean, could you get a roll of toilet paper when this pandemic started?
Well, the toilet paper story is very interesting, actually. If you looked at, initially people said, well, people are hoarding toilet paper, and there's all this, there's no production. And so when you build a paper mill, you have a paper machine that's pretty specific in the type of paper that it produces. So there has been very good demand in things like paper towels, absorbent papers, toilet paper for sure, packaging material. There's been a big increase in online shopping that's been going on, and that's been happening over time. But with the pandemic, certainly a lot more people were shopping online. So packaging papers, cardboard, those sorts of materials have been in much greater demand than printing and writing papers. Those paper machines in the mills that are producing printing and writing papers can probably be rebuilt, retooled to produce the other materials. But it's a very, very expensive process to do that, and time consuming. And some mills have made that shift. The mill in Rumford, Maine, my understanding is they've shifted away to some extent from printing and writing papers to packaging paper. So brown paper uses more softwood material than it does hardwood. So a shift there has occurred. The toilet paper story, initially, certainly more people were buying toilet paper because they were staying at home more. And just the logistics of being at home means that you're using the bathroom at home more than you're using it at the office. And if you think about the toilet paper that's used in an office situation versus in your home, oftentimes those toilet paper rolls in an office are a foot in diameter. They're very large material. They're not produced by the same mills that produce toilet paper for consumer use. So while there was probably plenty of production in total, it wasn't production in the right type of material to keep the supplies on the shelf.
Interesting. Who'd have thunk?
It's
So Tim wants to know what happens to old pallets if they're just left to rot and return carbon to the ground, or are they burned to return carbon to the atmosphere?
oftentimes there's a huge industry in this country in rebuilding pallets and reusing pallets. So a lot of times, depending on the pallet, the grade of pallet that's being used and the product it's being used for, things like pallets that are being used for things like food products, use pallets, and then are recycled. They may be chipped up and used for wood fuel and power plants, those sorts of applications. The hardwood pallets that are able to be reused, if they, they can be reused directly over and over again until something breaks. And then there's a big industry in actually repairing those pallets and rebuilding them. They'll bring them into a plant. They can cut out the boards that are broken and place those, and reuse those pallets. So they get used many times over, but there are certain ones that, when they reach the end of life, they're generally ground up and recycled rather than sitting to rot somewhere. And people, they get given away many times and end up under people's wood piles. Makes a great way to keep the wood off the ground. So
I understand they're kind of hard to find these days.
yeah, I imagine, certainly we've seen a lot of interest in burning wood recently, and people are picking up those pallets that are being given away.
Yeah. So John wants to know, and we're getting close to 10 o'clock here, but John wants to know, do we export more wood out of state than we harvest? What are some challenges to growing Vermont value-added processing? What are your thoughts on incentivizing value added in the state? Oh my gosh, and this question goes on. Do you have any sense of planned use for ash cut for public safety reasons due to EAB? Thank you, John. That's a mouthful there.
So let's see, where do I start with this question? So let me start with the last part first, the ash cut for public safety reasons. It can be difficult to utilize urban trees in higher value uses, just because of the fear that mill owners have of finding hardware and other things growing in those trees. Oftentimes, public trees aren't of the greatest form. Ash is, maybe an exception to that rule because it self-prunes so well and tends to have good form. But oftentimes it ends up being firewood. What we've heard from folks in the industry is once the tree starts to decline, there are significant reductions in the strength properties in ash. The wood becomes brittle and snaps off. So once it's been infested, it's a dangerous thing to fool with. Certainly dead ash is something you want to avoid altogether. The trees, rather than uprooting, they snap off, and in places where you wouldn't expect them to. And it's a significant hazard, not to be left to amateurs to fool with. And for products like tool handles that require a strong, resilient, flexible wood, those infested ash trees or dead ash trees just don't make the grade. They're too brittle, and they lose their strength properties fairly quickly once they die. What was the first part of that question, Kathleen?
It was about value-added processing in the state.
Okay.
Once it leaves the state, how could we help to keep more of it here, I think really is the question.
Yeah.
And that probably has to do with a lot of our loss of sawmills over the last decade or so.
Certainly since the 90s, we've seen a reduction in the number of sawmills. It's been a pretty steady decline. more so in the northern part of the state than in the south. And in a lot of cases, you know, the hardwood milling industry that used to exist in the northern half of the state has pretty much gone out of business and been dismantled, and that market has been replaced by mills in Quebec. So we do see a fair amount of wood going out of state. We're still, and wood coming back into the state from out of state. So the wood moves across state boundaries fairly seamlessly, and into Canada fairly seamlessly. But overall, I think we're still utilizing more of it here in the state than we're exporting at this point. It would be great to have more manufacturing here in the state. Certainly there's a lot of small manufacturers, craftspeople, and so on that are utilizing wood products in the state. Trying to get a match, it'd be great to have something like a flooring mill in Vermont. All that material that ends up in flooring coming out of our Vermont mills, for the most part, goes to Quebec to be manufactured into flooring. There are some advantages that Quebec probably has. It's always been a little tough to tell exactly what those are. The Canadian government seems to have a policy to their policy seems to be to create jobs in rural areas rather than funnel everyone into the metropolitan areas. So, there is economic development money available for those mills in Quebec to expand and build new facilities. It's really a political decision here as to what incentives are available, and certainly the permitting situation in Vermont is, if it isn't a real barrier, it's at least a perceived barrier to industrial development, economic development in the state. So.
Thank you. We are over 10 o'clock here.
Yeah.
I took the liberty of putting Paul and Emma's emails in the chat box there. So if you have questions that were not answered, I think they would be happy to answer them for you if you sent them an email. Is that correct, Paul and Emma? Did I
Sure.
overstep?
No, that's fine as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, all good. As long as I know the answer.
Okay.
Right.
You can find it. I have faith in you, Emma.
Absolutely.
If it's a complicated question, please leave your phone number, and I'd much rather talk through it than try to. Unlike Emma, I don't type very quickly. So.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. There was lots of really good information there. A little different than we have done with natural resource professionals. It's just nice to talk about how we use what we grow in the forest.
Yeah.
Something a little different. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Absolutely. Okay. Bye-bye, folks.
Take care.
Bye, all.